From the very first day construction began on Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, locals knew something was wrong. Workers unearthed ancient human remains, and the land beneath the future rides turned out to be a Native American burial ground. But the project wasn't stopped. The park was built directly on top of the graves. The deaths started soon after. Children were killed on rides, on swings, on the very ground where members of the tribe had been laid to rest generations earlier. And today, long after the park closed, people still report hearing laughter, but it's not the laughter of living children. The swings move on their own, the carousel turns without power, and the shadows that wander between the trees have nothing to do with fun. Long before laughter, music, and children's rides appeared on this ground, it already carried its own story. Heavy, dark, and suffocating. According to Mercer County archival records, centuries before Lake Shawnee existed, this land belonged to a Shawnee settlement. And it was here that one of those tragedies occurred. One without an official name, but with a very long shadow. In the 18th century, a violent conflict unfolded between settlers and the Shawnee. On these very fields, the family of Edward Clayton was killed, 3 of his children murdered, and a 4th, a 9-year-old girl, abducted. The event became known only because a county judge recorded it as an incident that triggered later retaliation. In response, settlers massacred the nearby Shawnee village. Archaeologists later confirmed that the burial site of that village lay directly beneath the future location of the amusement park. There are no precise historical records of how many people died here, but during excavations in the 1980s, at least 13 graves were uncovered, several belonging to children. Archaeologists determined that these burials had remained undisturbed until the 20th century, meaning the earth had not been touched for over 200 years. Locals have always repeated the same warning. This land does not tolerate building. It has already seen too much. So when a businessman arrived in the 1920s with plans to construct an amusement park, no one warned him about the history beneath his feet. Or perhaps he simply chose not to listen. On this land, laughter never lasted long. After the tragic events of the 18th century, the land near Lake Shawnee lay largely undisturbed for decades. In the early 1900s, farmers avoided this plot, calling it heavy and ill-fated. Crops wilted faster here than elsewhere. Tools broke for no obvious reason, and livestock steered clear of the field, as though something kept them away. A 1912 archive entry records a farm worker who refused his night shift because voices were echoing among the trees, where there should be no people. At the time, such reports were dismissed as fatigue or imagination. Yet the documentation lingered with one clear message. The land was never empty, even when no one was present. In 1924, the ground was purchased by businessman Conley Snyder, who planned an amusement park, rides, swings, lakeside fun. Construction began in spring, and almost immediately it triggered concern. Workers reported tools disappearing and reappearing elsewhere. One claimed to have seen figures standing silently on the edge of the site in the fog. When he approached, they simply dissolved. But the most alarming event occurred soon after. The first attraction, an old swing ride, began moving on its own while still disconnected from power. The warning signs were clear, yet the park still opened. When Lake Shawnee Amusement Park opened in 1926, It seemed the land's dark past had finally been forgotten. In the first months, hundreds of families arrived each weekend. Children raced between rides, vendors shouted over the fairground noise, and the lake shimmered in the sun. But those who worked there daily sensed something else. The silence hadn't disappeared. It had simply learned to wait. During the first season, staff avoided discussing the small oddities they noticed. Swings that drifted ever so slightly with no wind. The looping ride that paused for a few seconds, as if someone were holding the mechanism from inside. The lake, where a perfect circular ripple would form even when there were no boats, no swimmers, not even a breeze. These details were dismissed as quirks of open terrain or aging equipment. Yet workers began noticing a pattern. The closer it got to sunset, the stronger the feeling that someone was walking right behind them. As they cleaned the grounds after closing, some reported hearing soft footsteps, sometimes light, like a child's, sometimes heavy, like an adult's. But when they turned around, they saw only the long shadows cast by uneven lamps. The lake worried them most. Locals claimed the water did not sleep. At dusk, a strange mist hovered above the surface, always at the same spot near the shore, never spreading. Sometimes it shifted, as if something beneath was pushing upward, trying to break through. Night security logs often mention muffled voices, though no source was ever identified. One guard wrote that he saw a boy in old-fashioned clothing near the foggy shoreline. But when he approached, the bank was empty, with no footprints left behind. Everything still looked like coincidence. Nothing seemed dangerous yet. But everyone felt the same unspoken truth. The park was balanced on a fragile line, and something on that land was waiting for the moment to make itself heard. By the late 1920s, Lake Shawnee had become a popular weekend destination. Crowds gathered, parents brought their children, and music echoed from the concession stands. But beneath the cheerful facade, something was accumulating, what employees quietly called the sense of a presence. The park seemed to smile, but underneath, it clenched its teeth. The first to openly acknowledge this was Henry Carter, a maintenance mechanic. In a technical log, he noted that when the crowds thinned and the noise faded, the park seemed to change. The metal structures produced muted sounds unlike creaking or swaying. At times he felt the old swings reacted not to wind, but to something else, as if someone brushed past them while he wasn't looking. Other workers observed similar small oddities. Lost items returned to places where a child physically couldn't have placed them. Damp footprints appearing in storage rooms on dry nights. A lamp in the security office turning on by itself, but only when no one was standing nearby. Despite this, the park continued its routine. Perhaps if all these notes had been collected into a single report, someone might have noticed a pattern. But each entry seemed insignificant on its own, so no one connected them. The first serious warning signs came from the lakeshore. Night guards began reporting that the water behaved strangely, restless, even on windless nights. At times, quiet splashing echoed from the darkness, rhythmic, as if someone were standing in the water up to their knees. Soon, children began returning to their parents in tears, saying that someone was in the water. Some claimed to have seen a boy, others a hand disappearing into the fog, but adults saw nothing. By the early 1930s, the park looked cheerful only during the day. In the evenings, it resembled a place that was never meant to stay open for so long. By the mid-1930s, the park had changed so noticeably that even management could no longer dismiss everything as coincidence or faulty equipment. The atmosphere, once merely strange, had grown heavy, like the dense air before a storm. And then came the events that many would later call the first true breaking point of Lake Shawnee. The first incident officially entered into reports happened by the lake. According to witnesses, a young boy playing near the shoreline suddenly fell into the water, as if something had grabbed his leg. Rescuers couldn't save him. Several claimed he kept pushing upward toward the surface, but as though something cold was pulling him down from below. His body was recovered only hours later. That was the moment when the whispered conversations among staff turned into tense silence. After that, the park seemed to move to a different rhythm. The swings became unpredictable, rocking harder than they should have. And one evening, a tragic fall occurred. A girl slipped from the top of the ride, and an employee who was nearby said he saw a pale flash behind her just before the fall, something that vanished instantly. Parents blamed negligence, staff blamed malfunctioning machinery, but everyone sensed something else. The park wasn't simply aging, it was reacting, as if it came alive whenever fear was present. In the following years, the incidents didn't stop. No one called it a series of deaths, but everyone understood the pattern repeated far too often, especially near the lake and the swings. The two areas considered the most dangerous, though no inspection ever managed to explain why. By the end of the decade, workers no longer tried to rationalize what was happening. They simply knew. When silence fell, the park changed. And every time laughter faded, something else took its place. After a string of tragedies in the 1930s, the park continued operating, but the owners were forced to tighten safety rules. Guards worked around the clock, and small rescue stations were set up along the lake. For a while, it seemed as though things had stabilized, until an event occurred that would permanently change the fate of Lake Shawnee. In the summer of 1944, an 8-year-old girl went missing during a regular park day. She was last seen near the lake, feeding ducks. According to her mother, the child stood by the water for less than a minute. When the woman looked away for a brief moment, the girl simply disappeared. No splash, no scream, no signs of distress of any kind. The search began immediately. Boats scanned the lake. Hooks were dragged along the bottom, and police combed the surrounding woods. For 3 long hours, no one could find a single trace. According to one of the rescuers, the lake that day was unusually still, flat as glass, without the smallest ripple. Her body wasn't found in the lake or in the forest, but under the old footbridge, in a shallow area where a child could not physically drown. According to the official report, the body was perfectly clean. No algae, no mud, no signs of struggle. It was as if she had been placed there after death. One line from Sergeant J. Henderson's police statement still stands out. "This does not look like a drowning. I don't know how this is possible." After the incident, fear among the staff became palpable. They no longer whispered about strange little things. Employees began quitting, some silently, others submitting written statements that openly said, "I feel like something in the water is watching me." The park remained open on paper, but everyone understood the truth. The tragedies here were not random. They were part of the place itself. After a series of strange incidents, the park's management decided to increase security, especially around the lake area and the old ride zones. But one night changed everything. The night investigators would later call the incident that ended Lake Shawnee. On August 24th, 1985, two employees stayed for overnight duty. One of them, 26-year-old Richard Kelly, was assigned to patrol the area near the old boat dock, the very part of the land that once belonged to the indigenous burial ground. He began his routine at 11:40 p.m. This was a standard patrol route, usually taking no more than 15 minutes. But half an hour later, he still hadn't returned. His partner that night, Tom Blaine, remembered hearing only a faint burst of static through his headset, as if someone had tried to speak but never finished. It bothered him, but he assumed Kelly had simply lost signal near the trees. When an hour passed with no sign of him, Blaine called the police. Search teams arrived quickly. The first thing they found was Kelly's flashlight, lying near the entrance to the beach path, pointed directly toward the lake. The light was still on. There were no signs of struggle, no slip marks, no footprints leading out. Only Kelly's footprints, leading toward the water, and stopping abruptly half a meter before the shoreline, as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Divers searched the lake thoroughly. No body, no clothing, no radio, nothing that could explain what happened. A later police report stated, "No physical evidence indicates accidental entry into the water." But the most unsettling discovery came from security footage. On a distant camera, the timestamp 12:03 a.m., a dark figure appeared standing near the lake. Kelly, dressed in white that night, could not have been the silhouette seen on the tape. The figure was thin, unnaturally still, and after a few seconds, it simply dissolved from the frame, disappearing without moving. After that night, the park never opened its gates again. It wasn't just another incident. It was the moment when everyone, management, staff, investigators, understood one thing. The lake was no longer just dangerous. It was claiming people. After Richard Kelly disappeared, the park was officially declared a hazardous site. The owning company quickly removed the remaining equipment, hauled the rides to storage, and fenced off the land with metal barriers. But everyone involved in the investigation understood the truth. They weren't shutting down a park. They were sealing away a problem no one could explain. Over the following years, the land changed hands several times. One investor wanted to build a residential complex. Another planned to turn it into a private campground. But every project collapsed for the same reason. The moment heavy machinery entered the grounds, accidents began to happen. Excavators stalled without mechanical issues. Concrete slabs cracked during pouring, and construction workers refused to stay after sunset. They claimed to hear footsteps inside empty maintenance buildings and see lights flickering near the lake. In 1994, the owner brought in a team of geophysicists. Their readings showed abnormal electromagnetic fluctuations beneath the soil, the kind typically found at sites of mass burials. During the survey, remains from Native American graves were uncovered, many of them disturbed during the park's construction decades earlier. The bodies showed no signs of damage, yet some were found in unnatural positions, as if they had been lifted and set back down multiple times. Visitors who came to explore the abandoned property documented unsettling phenomena, small footprints appearing on wet ground with no trails leading toward or away from the lake. The sound of chains, even though none were installed. And, most chilling of all, sightings of the same figure standing by the water, thin motionless, always facing the lake. Today, Lake Shawnee appears peaceful. Grass climbs through broken pavement. Trees wrap around the skeleton of the old carousel, and the lake lies still as glass. But when a new visitor steps onto the grounds, the air thickens, subtly, but unmistakably, as if someone is watching. Because this was never just an amusement park. It is land that remembers. And it feels as though it is still waiting for the next name to be written in its unseen ledger.